All right, friends, good evening. Welcome to Emotionally Healthy Spirituality. We're so glad that you came. There's those joining us by live streaming. Welcome to you out there in internet land. We're glad that you're here with us as well. It's good that we've come together. This is the keynote in a major series we're doing in our church that involves all kinds of interesting things. There's a book room and the choir room, which is immediately in this direction in the hallways back there, where we have books that are for sale. Emotionally Healthy Spirituality is the one that our groups will be studying. We have the best daily devotional I have used in 10 years, called The Daily Office, and this is going to track along with our material. It is wonderful. It has helped me so much. We're going to have these for sale. You were handed a card, gives you the opportunity to participate in a group. I told some of you on Sunday, I'm not a group kind of guy. But I was in one of these groups, and it really helped me tremendous. So we're giving you opportunities to sign up for that. There are baskets up front where you can place those. We'll get you properly registered. Tuesday morning and evening groups will have childcare. That's a great thing. And I should say two things parenthetically before I introduce the speaker. One is quite a few have been dinging me since I said the prayer and the Panthers lost. And I would point out that I didn't pray for the Panthers. I prayed for us to do something about poverty. So we'll see if that prayer gets answered. And the other thing, for those of you who worship in this room a lot, I'm kind of digging this screen. We're going to have this here every Sunday. Not. Our guest speaker tonight, Peter Scazzero, has come from, he's come from Italy. No, he's come from New York City, Queens, to be with us tonight. I'm not going to give him a long introduction. He and I are going to talk to each other later about some things. He's a wonderful writer and speaker and has given us all this great material that we're going to be using. He was at my home for dinner a little bit ago, and we're already counting you as a friend. So join me in welcoming Pete Scazzero.
Thank you. I really came here because I'm trying to figure out why everybody from New York City is moving to Charlotte. And I heard there's some resentment coming in the other direction, So, well, thank you for receiving my fellow citizens from New York. But it's great to be here, and every time I come to Charlotte area, it's a little bit, it's a shock, because in New York, when you go to a restaurant, you serve the waiters. And I was with Leighton Ford, a friend of mine here from Charlotte. He tried to get the waiter to be nasty to us. She couldn't do it. It was great. So anyway, thank you for having me here. It's wonderful. It's already been a great day for me. And so let me just say what we're going to do here. I'm going to talk for probably about 30 minutes or so. And then we're going to actually do something experiential called a community temperature reading together. And even though we're crowded in here in the space, it'll be great. All right. So you should have some notes in front of you here. It says Emotionally Healthy Spirituality in the front. And if you're a note taker, I'll kind of follow along in broad strokes, the basic couple of pages there. And then most importantly, we're going to do the exercise that's in the back. And so, again, I pastor a church called New Life Fellowship Church located in Queens, New York City. And it's about 1,500 people. We have people from over 73 countries in the church. So Queens is a melting pot. It's one of the 5 boroughs of New York City, but it's the immigrant boroughs. So about 71% of the 2.3 million people who live there were born outside the country. So it's a very international, complex place. We've been there for a long time. I have 4 daughters from the ages of 19 to 28, and so it's been a wonderful journey for me. And so really, this whole what I'm going to share with you comes out of really our journey of living in New York for 30 years in the inner city. And so let me begin by talking just a little bit about what's the challenge before us. And I'm talking now about the church in general. Not simply the church in originally I thought it was just New York, the church everywhere. So number one is that the church in general is almost indistinguishable from the world. In other words, it's really the way people do conflict, the way folks relate at work. There's not a big difference in behavior-wise between Christians and non-Christians. In fact, a lot of studies have been done that people in our churches are not experiencing deep transformation. There have been actually studies done by secular PhDs, as well as from Barna Group and the Willow Creek Reveal study. I'm talking about massive study, millions of dollars worth of investment, and they have actually concluded that people in our churches, even folks who are active in church, are not being profoundly transformed. They have all these data points to measure it. But they said that American Christians have slipped into a spiritual coma. And again, it really has shaken up much of Christendom here in the U.S. Thirdly, that the emotional intelligence of people, again, inside the church, is not that different from those outside. And again, you've heard about emotional intelligence in secular studies, but referring to things about self-awareness, ability to deal with conflict, managing one's triggers when under stress, that really, there's really not any difference. You don't say, oh, those Christians at work, they are tremendous at listening, or they are phenomenal at resolving conflict. People don't say that about us. Fourthly, the marriage institution continues to decline both in North America and actually around the world. And I won't go into all that, but when you think about, they've done studies on what's an exceptional marriage, and one study revealed about 7% of marriages, they say in the culture, would be considered exceptional, and they have these criteria for it. But those 7% of exceptional marriages are not necessarily in the churches. They're out there. And that's, again, another sad statistic. Fifthly, most people, even leaders, aren't really deeply in Scripture and prayer. Now, again, I'm referring to prayer as communion with God. May go to a prayer meeting occasionally, may even have devotionals in the morning, but in terms of a lifestyle of communion or relationship with Jesus, most people, it's quite spotty and compartmentalized. Number 6, the church is not effectively transforming society. In where I live in New York City, there are certain broken neighborhoods where we can have 3 churches on a city block, or even 10 churches on a couple of block radius, but the neighborhood is going to hell in a handbasket and continues to deteriorate. Tremendous problem. And again, we have mega churches all over our nation. It's not necessarily transforming our cities morally or culturally. 7thly, church leadership remains violent to many folks who are in leadership, lay leadership, clergy. We'll talk about the sense of violence often to their own personal lives, their own walk with God, their own families, by being in leadership. And you've got a steady stream of people that get involved in activity serving in leadership in churches that often will get out and sit in the back of the church. And then finally, social media and technologies are having a really massive impact on people's ability to sustain a relationship with Jesus or with other people. It's very hard to multitask and be present. And the implications of how that's going to affect the next generation's relationship with God, we haven't even begun to explore that. And so, again, these are some of the trends, and you could add to that list. But we are in a crisis. I mean, it's not a small problem. We didn't get here overnight. We're not going to come out of it overnight. But I just put those 8 things up for you. These are my observations, some of the stuff I've gathered. And the problem is massive. It's colossal. And so, therefore, to address it is going to require something that is not a program. It's going to be something much larger, much more far-reaching, much deeper, much wider. And so that's what I think God slowly, over a number of years, led me into. So let me tell you a bit of my story to kind of share how I got into it. I like to call it, I've had 4 conversions up to now, and I'll probably have another one soon. But I became a Christian, I became a Christian at 19 in college. I was kind of agnostic prior to that, and was raised in the church, but left by 12 or 13, and did not see any relevance of church to my life. But in 19, in the late 70s, met a person whose life had been transformed by the grace of Jesus, and God met me. Experienced forgiveness, the love of God in Christ, the resurrection of Jesus, the cross. He died for me. And really, I had a conversion experience. It was remarkable. And I began this journey of a relationship with Jesus, and it was wonderful. I got involved with a group called InterVarsity Christian Fellowship and a local church, and began to learn to study the Bible and fellowship and spiritual disciplines and sharing my faith and serving the poor and all that. And it was great. Went on staff with a group called InterVarsity Christian Fellowship, began to work on university campuses, and I grew. I grew spiritually. Instead of going to law school, ended up going to seminary, and eventually went to Costa Rica, learned Spanish. I felt God's call to go back to New York City, where my family was from, and to work among the poor, to plant a church there. And so after living in Central America for a year, got married at that point, we moved into Queens, planted New Life Fellowship Church in September of 1987. It was what was called by one friend of mine kind of a suicide mission. It was walking the streets, trying to start a church. And the church grew quite rapidly. We went from 0 to 100 the first year, and 100 to 200 the second year, and 300 the third year, and then we started a Spanish service in the afternoon because I spoke Spanish. And by year 6 or 7, New Life Fellowship Church was a happening place, and very exciting. Many people coming to faith for the first time. We were running 3 services in English in the morning and Spanish in the afternoon, and several hundred people, and probably 400 or 500 people in English, and a couple hundred people in Spanish, and. But I was exhausted. I was very tired. I felt like this picture. The yoke was hard and heavy. Jesus says, "My yoke is easy and my burden is light." But somehow the yoke of serving Christ had become very heavy, very hard. And I remember in my mid-30s praying for retirement. And I felt like God had tricked me to become a pastor. I don't know if you ever felt like that. Not here, of course. And so really 6, 7 years into it, I'm saying, there's something really wrong here. Now, again, I'd been to 2 of the best seminaries in the country. I felt like I had the best leadership training available at that time. I was reading every book I could find on leadership and pastoring. So it wasn't like I wasn't conscientious. But I said, something's really wrong here. And again, in New York, they make a lot of movies in New York because we have a lot of pathology. And everyone's got a story. And so whether, one fellow, for example, he was Colombian, South America, and he was part of the Colombian drug cartel. And he was supposed to kill somebody to go up the ladder. But he didn't want to kill the person. He had a conscience. So he doesn't kill the person, and so the cartel comes after him to kill him, but they kill his twin brother by mistake. So at the funeral of his twin brother, the cartel comes by with machine guns, and basically and they shoot it up in the air in a car driving by to let him know that they know they missed and they're coming back. So he flees. And where does he come? He doesn't come to Charlotte. He comes to Queens, near our church. Make a long story short, he comes to Christ in an outreach, and he becomes a part of our church. And now he's a leader in our church. And he's on fire for God. He's serving, he's leading our outreach ministries, all kinds of things. He's putting in 30 hours a week as a volunteer. And he doesn't kill people, which is great, at least physically. But if you disagree with him, he may make you an offer you can't refuse. One of those things. I remember watching him and saying, here's a guy, he's reading his Bible, he's praying, but underneath he's proud, he's defensive, he's critical, and you better not cross this guy. And I just remember saying to myself, we're doing something wrong here. I'm preaching the Bible, we're in prayer meetings, I'm trying everything I know to get at what I call now the iceberg. You've heard about this already. You'll hear about it more. It's a wonderful image of the Christian life because, an iceberg, 1/10 is above the surface of an iceberg, 9/10 is below the surface. So when you think about a person's life, above the surface is what you see. So you see, for example, respectable behavior. You see if they're coming to church, they're reading their Bible, they're praying, they're loyal workers, they're honest. That's above the surface. But the real question is what's going on in the 9/10 beneath the surface. And I remember in my 4th or 5th year pastoring saying, people are not changing deeply in our church. Because when you get close to them, you find out there's a lot of stuff in here that surfaces behind closed doors, especially if you're in small groups over a period of time. There's anger, there's defensive,ness, there's miserable marriages, all kinds of stuff, addictions. And I said, what is going on here? So I'm at this point, I'm trying everything I know that I'm like, Jesus, change these people into the iceberg. Pray it out of them, cast it out of them, whatever they need. But do something, change these people. And I realize I'm stuck. So I don't know what to do. I got these fellows like this guy Orlando from the former drug cartel that's running over people in our church, and I don't know how to stop him. And I could multiply him many, many, many times over. And so I'm realizing something's missing. And so what happens, I'm looking at everybody else's problems, but as you know how it is, God sometimes comes to you when you're pointing a finger at everybody else. And so now it's 1994, and I'm exhausted. I'm tired. I'm gaining the whole world and losing my own soul. And I'm stressed out. And so I know I can't keep living like this at this pace. And then secondly, our congregation in the afternoon, which was about 250 people in Spanish, I walk in one day and 200 people are gone. There's 50 people sitting there in the pews. And I'm saying, hey, where is everybody? Oh, yeah, they're at the new church down the street. I said, what new church down the street? Oh, yeah, Pastor Joel, he's over there, And I said, well, what do you mean? He said, yeah, you're Abraham, Pete, and you're Lot, he's Abraham. You're Saul, he's David. I'm like, oh, my God. We didn't have anything we call emotionally healthy spirituality at that time, and so we didn't know how to resolve conflicts well and talk honestly to each other and clearly and respectfully. And so, he was unhappy because I wasn't available to him like he had hoped. And then, of course, that was the word of the Lord. And he left. And so I was so angry at this guy that I wanted to kill him. Now, understand, I'm Italian-American. And I do have some mafia roots on my mother's side. So I did consider calling a great uncle of mine. Because you just don't do that in my family. But being a good Christian, that was not an option. And so I just said, I'm going to forgive him with the love of Jesus. But that didn't work so well either. I still wanted to kill him. And I hated him. And I couldn't deny the fact that I hated him. And so I found myself in the car alone, cursing. I mean, cursing like a truck driver at a rest stop. And I had rage coming out of me. And I didn't know what to do with it. Now here I am, I'm the cursing pastor. You understand? It's not easy to be a cursing pastor. I'm here talking about the love of Jesus, but I'm cursing on Monday. Do you understand? And so I realized I have a problem, a big problem. And this is 1994, so I don't have a theology for this, and so I start an inward journey. I start looking at my own iceberg. Maybe there's some problems inside of me. And so I start this kind of inward journey, looking at my own iceberg, my own stuff. And I'm a type A guy. I'm making it happen. It took a lot to get me to look inside. And then thirdly, my wife was unhappy. And at that time, we had 4 small daughters, raised, we lived next to drug dealers and prostitutes. I mean, we got robbed at one point 7 times in 3 months, And so, we were living in a tough situation. I'm working 6.5 days a week. She's lonely. And she's unhappy. But I'm thinking, she's unhappy, but all the women in my family are unhappy. And so I'm thinking, what's so odd about that? I'm thinking that's normal, And so she starts complaining a lot and saying these things to me. And so for 2 years, I go on this inward journey to kind of sort out what's going on. And maybe I've contributed to these problems. Maybe it's not all out there. Maybe it's in me. And I start going to a Christian counselor. And understand, I didn't even believe in Christian counseling. That was for wimps. That was for people who couldn't buck it up. But I needed somebody to talk to. And, when you're down, you'll talk to a frog. You'll talk to anybody. And so I start that. But in January 2nd, 1996, my wife comes to me and she says, I'm going to give you the Cliff Notes version. She says, Pete, your leadership stinks. And I don't respect it. You don't have the courage to confront some of the people in the church that need to be confronted, because if you do, they'll leave. And you're still recovering from the 200 people that left 2 years ago. So I'm not going to sit here in the second row and participate in what I know is a hypocrisy. And so I'm going to another church. And she wasn't even angry at that point. She was resolute. And so I wanted to kill her too, obviously. I was going to call my uncle on her. You don't do that. First, you don't do that to an Italian American, and you definitely don't do it to the senior pastor of the church. But she started attending another church. she had my attention. I mean, she saved my life, actually, because she got my attention. And so at that point, actually, you know when you think you're at rock bottom, and then you find out you're not? That's what happened to me. I said, oh my gosh, there's a whole new level here. I'm on the bottom now, and now at this point, either something happens or I'm going to resign. And I used to joke, I'm going to resign and go sell insurance in New Jersey, you know. And so I called my friend who's here tonight in Charlotte, Leighton Ford. And he'd been my mentor for years. And I said, you know, I'm in a crisis, Leighton, and you know, my wife did this, and we need to go see somebody. And I'm thinking, we got to go see someone to fix her. And so he recommends this place in Pennsylvania, and we go for 2 days. It was a place for basically fallen pastors, you know. And so we go, and I'm hoping they fix her, and she's hoping they fix me. But in that week, God met us. And really, it was like a conversion. That's all I can say. It was remarkable. Now, understand, I've been thinking and pondering about these concepts for 2 years. But it all came together for me in this moment. And what happened was, in the middle of the week, my wife stands up on the bed, and she curses me out. I'd never heard her curse ever. But she got it out. And I remember sitting on the bed listening to her about 3 in the morning, and I'm thinking, this is awesome. Because it was the most honest moment of our 8 years of marriage to that point. Because I knew, you know how you just know it's how they feel anyway? But she was saying it, and it was all true. I was an idiot, you know, but it was a turning point because we got brutally honest with each other. And so the next day, she didn't go with me. She was too mad at me. So I walk in this office. These 2 therapists are there, and they say, you know, Christian therapist. And they say, where's your wife? I said, well, you know, she's not talking to me right now, you know. And they said, well, what are you going to do? I said, I don't know. That's why I'm here. You're supposed to tell me what to do, you know. They said, why don't you get some time alone and sort it out? And so it was then that it all came together for me, and it was like all I can say. It was like a lightning shot from heaven. Now here, you'll read about this when you do the Emotionally Healthy Spirituality series. This diagram comes out of a Fuller theological New Testament professor named Robert Gulick, who's now deceased, and a spiritual director. And they developed this over a number of years about mostly, you know, evangelicals and Christians, and saying that most Christians are stuck, was their thesis, 85 to 90%. And that, you know, we start out, you know, life-changing awareness of God, stage 1, and then we start learning, we become disciples, and then we start actively serving God. But at some point, we hit a wall. They call these, you hit a wall. Everybody hits a wall. And because the nature of evangelical thinking and understanding of who God is and discipleship is so narrow, people generally get stuck at the wall, and they can be a Christian 40 years, 50 years, but they never move. Some drop out. Most just stay stuck. They're stable, but they're stuck. And I realized that's where I was. I was, at that point, a Christian 17 years, 18 years, and I was stuck. And I realized most people were stuck around me. And so, but it was at this moment in 96 where it all came together. Because basically they say, at some point, you got to begin a journey inward, you break through, and you'll talk about that in the series. So I'm banging the wall trying to get through it. And here was the revolution for me. I saw that I was an emotional infant trying to lead a church. That I was a child trying to raise up mothers and fathers of the faith. That my spiritual formation had left large areas of my own iceberg untouched. And that emotional maturity and spiritual maturity are inseparable. That it's impossible to be spiritually mature while remaining emotionally immature. In other words, it doesn't matter how brilliant you are, if you have a PhD, it doesn't matter how gifted you are, it doesn't matter how much Bible you know, it doesn't matter how many hours you spend fasting and praying. The question really is, are you a loving, approachable, soft, humble person? As Paul says in 1 Corinthians 13, it's the one thing the devil can never compromise. It's agape love. And I realized that whole emotional arena had never gotten explored in my life. And so I began this journey in 1996 about what does it mean to do spiritual transformation of the whole person? And I really began with just what does it mean to dig into this emotional component? Things like family of origin and how it impacts who we are, going back 3-4 generations, and grief and loss, etc. And it was life transforming. And we came out of that in 1996, my wife and I, we took a 4-month sabbatical and began to lead the church differently, slowed down our church. And it just bringing in emotional health was a revolution. We were born again, really. I don't know what to say. It was incredible. We began to lead out of our marriage, began to talk about things like limits, loving well, began to integrate some skills. We're going to do a skill tonight. But from 1996 to 2003, it was like a little revolution took place in our church just by bringing in what we call the emotional component. But at the same time, while people's lives were being changed, my goal as a pastor is that people would love Jesus. And out of that love of Jesus, we serve the world. And I realized that people, at least in New York City, were way too busy. And even myself was still too busy. And while emotional health had slowed us down, something more was needed. And so I began to read quite a bit about monasticism, monastic movements through history. And it culminated in 2003, 2004. I took a sabbatical and got a grant for it. And for a 4-month period, my wife and I visited monasteries for 4 months in France, England, United States, a variety of Roman Catholic, Orthodox, even some Protestant evangelical monasteries. And we began to just live rhythms of silence and solitude and a lifestyle kind of out of the active life, but kind of this whole nother world of a slowed down existence. And it was a revolution. It was like, I call it was like our third conversion. You know, Robert Swenson, some of you may know the name, he's a physicist. And he's done a lot of work on history. And this is a chart he made up. And it kind of traces recorded history over the last, 5,000 years. And he goes, we have 5,000 years of recorded history. But he goes, the last 2,000 years, for the most part, if you look at history, history's been very slow and very simple, not a lot of big changes. And he talks about even the Industrial Revolution in 1700 to 1900 with the locomotive, telegraph, the telephone, modern medicine was birthed, all these things, the explosion of the Industrial Revolution, that was a massive change. And that was more change in those 200 years than the previous, 5,000. But he says the last 30 years have been so much change going on in our culture right now that it makes all the rest of history, including the Industrial Revolution, look like a flat line. In other words, we are living in such a moment of speed of change. It's dizzying. It is like this. And his point is that this line is not going to slow down. I mean, it is where we live. And so as a result, we don't have a lot of margin. And think of you have your life right now, you've got 80% capacity. It means you've got some space in your life. Most of us are living at 100% capacity. Our lives are full. We don't have room for hardly anything else. In fact, most of us are 120 capacity. We're overloaded. We not only we don't have time for other things, we are running in the negative and we're exhausted and it's like the plane's going to crash. And most people, even I thought it was just New York City that people were running around like crazy. What shocked me, especially when I began to travel a bit, I realized, oh my goodness, this is a rural issue. This is a suburban issue. This is in Idaho. This is in Seattle. Then I found out it's a global issue. It's in Asia, Africa, Latin America. It's everywhere. And so it's a tremendous problem because when we're so busy, we have to live off other people's spirituality because we don't have time to develop our own. And I realized it didn't matter what program we did at our church, that unless we slow down somehow and got people connected personally with God directly, it didn't matter the programs or size of churches. Nothing's really going to change. We're just moving the chairs around on the Titanic. And so in 2003, 2004, my wife and I made a drastic move to slow down our lives and begin to live out some rhythms of Sabbath keeping and silence and solitude. These were all new. And again, I'm living in Queens, New York. It's a madhouse, all right? I mean, when a phone rings in my neighborhood, you don't know. It could be one of 4 houses. And so our lives, again, went through another transformation, and we began to bring this into new life. Emotional health and this slowing down spirituality. And it kind of unleashed an explosion. And we really weren't even quite sure what happened. Our church clearly got younger. Young people began to come in great numbers. But more importantly, people's lives began to be radically transformed in a way that we couldn't even quite explain it. And that's why we finally wrote it down into a couple of books. But our tradition of American Christianity is very active. And that's a good thing. We do things to serve the poor, whether it's in Brazil or our area. We want to serve our communities. That's a great thing. we're very weak at silence and stillness and reflection. That's not something that's in our tradition. And so we had to go outside of that to actually begin to learn it, and it was transformative. But we felt God calling us to stay at our church, and as it began to grow and expand, to integrate this emotional health and contemplative spirituality into everyday life in the middle of Queens, New York. And then finally, that's how you know the feeling. You know the movie Speed? Remember, if he slows down the bus, there's a terrorist bomb on the bus, and if he slows down, the bus is going to blow up. Many of us are like on a bus. We're afraid that if we stop, the whole thing will blow. And meanwhile, he's running over, if you know the movie, he's running over cars, and he's causing havoc all over Los Angeles because he can't stop. And so that's me, pre-emotionally healthy spirituality, you know? And so basically, like Martha and Mary, if you know the story, Martha's serving Jesus and Mary's sitting at his feet. And basically what we're trying to do here in emotional healthy spirituality is slow down your life so you can balance your activity with, we call it contemplation, or basically being with Jesus. Most of us, our lives are like this. We've got a big circle. We're doing so many things, but we have a very little circle for being with God or just being with ourselves. And so as a result, our lives always feel like we're kind of running on empty and we're kind of off base. And so what the goal of what we're trying to do here and what you're going to be trying to do in this course is slow down. You slow down so you can be this. You have a circle of being with God to sustain your doing. In other words, you've got enough being or silence or solitude or reflection that your activity is coming from the inside out. It's coming from an anchor and a center. And that's the great challenge. And so that's part of what you're going to be being led into here in the next few months. So and then finally, for me, it led into, I call it leading with integrity. I began to apply this to some of you are in the corporate world, and we have 20, 25 staff, and how do you integrate all this emotional health and contemplative spirituality when you're running a large organization with budgets and hiring and firing and strategic planning and buying buildings and all of that. And that was a whole nother conversion for me as a leader. But I'll stop there. That's enough. It gives you a sense of how I got into this journey. So it's been 18 years for me. These have been the best 18 years of my life as a person, as a human being, as a Christian, as a father, as a husband. I've loved being a leader. And I realized there's a missing element of how we do spiritual formation, at least in the Western world, that have left us shallow, untransformed, and actually quite stuck. And I thought this was just for our church, actually, in Queens, New York. But I found out that it hit a nerve, really, that God was kind of breathing all over the world. There was this hunger and thirst. And lots of people have spoken about some of these themes in different ways. I think all I did was bring it together in one place for a local church and make it somewhat accessible. What I'd like to do here, the rest of our time, I've said enough. I'd like to actually do a skill with you. It's called a community temperature reading. It's actually on the back of your flyer if you want to turn to it. It looks like this. Because, now again, in our church, we've got people from over 73 nations. So try to imagine, we've got folks from Malaysia, Indonesia, Ghana. We've got folks from every country of Latin America. We've got African Americans. We've got folks from Bhutan and Nepal, India. And so we say everyone has to leave their family of origin and their culture and learn to do life in the new family of Jesus. And so every one of us in this room, in a sense, has to learn how is life meant to be lived in the new family of Jesus. And so part of EHS, or emotional spirituality, is not just learning a theology, it has to be experienced. What does this life look like in the new family of Jesus? So in 1996, we began to develop some simple tools that would basically put in practice our theology. And this is one of them. It's called a community temperature reading. It was actually originally developed by a woman named Virginia Satir. She was a brilliant woman who worked with families in the 60s and 70s. And we kind of adapted this and got permission to use it. And she used it to help create healthy families. And what I want to do is I'm going to explain it to you, and then James and I are going to demonstrate it for you. And then you're going to do it. All right, and then we'll process it afterwards. And so I'm going to go up. Now, the way she created it, she called it a temperature reading. And people would say, why are you calling it a a temperature thing. And her thesis was it improves the temperature of any family unit, whether it's a workplace or a family or a marriage, but it increases the temperature from cold to healthy. So that's why she called it temperature reading, and we call it community temperature reading. And so the goal of this is to become aware of what's going on inside of you and be able to communicate it clearly. But it's basically trying to create healthy community that for you, and whether your family of origin is and your culture, it's a shift for all of us. So it goes like this. It starts like this. With appreciations or excitement at the bottom, I'm going to go up. So here it is. Appreciation and excitement. So it starts very simple with I'm going to share an appreciation about life, about you, about some other people. Appreciations are very underrated in terms of what it does for relationships, what it does for building community. Again, some of us come out of families, we didn't do appreciations. I know people, just ask them to do an appreciation, it's almost painful. They didn't receive it much growing up, and they don't give it either. Or normally, we only appreciate things very often if a person goes over and beyond the call of duty. Then we'll say something. And very often it's in our heads, but we don't say it. And so this skill is basically, it's very simple, like, hey, Jerry, my wife, I really appreciate you filled up the car with gas. Or, Jerry, I really appreciate that you processed Maria when she was sick, and you went over there, got her medicine for her, and took care of her. Thank you so much. I wasn't available. And, Jerry, I really appreciate the fact that you cooked a great dinner last night. But it's saying it. And again, it creates very, very good. Very, very healthy environment. Or it can be excitement. I'm excited about being here. I'm excited about, it's warm. I'm really excited that it's warm. I'm really excited that I'm getting a chance to write and having some space to do that. I'm really excited about being with my friend Leighton and his wife Jeannie, being here in North Carolina. What a great treat that was. A great surprise as I was coming here. So very simple, and you'll do that, appreciations or excitements. The second is called worries, concerns, or puzzles. And now, obviously, people sometimes don't express what they're worried about or concerned about because they don't want to appear stupid, or inadequate. And so very often we'll not say anything. We kind of keep it inside. But so we encourage, to instead of, just to be able to share very openly. I'm worried about, my job. I'm worried about whether our company's going to make it, for the next phase of the changing economy. Or it's the word puzzle. And that's the word I want you to actually circle. This word puzzle is a great word. In fact, if you can learn the word puzzle, my wife likes to say it will keep you from 50% of your sinning. It will cut it down in half. What happens very often, when we see something, we make assumptions and often a negative interpretation. And we just jump to a judgment. And so rather than jump to a judgment, you kind of catch your heart and you express it differently. So for example, someone sends you an email. You send someone an email, but they don't respond to you. 3 days pass. What story do you tell yourself? What assumption do you begin to make? Uppity, aren't they now? Too busy for someone like me, huh? Or I bet they're angry. They're hurt by what I did because I didn't show up to their birthday party last month, You start telling yourself all these stories, and we make assumptions. And you may see them and say, why didn't you return my email after a week? Versus saying, hey, Joan, I'm puzzled. I sent you an email 2 days ago, and I never heard from you. Because you really don't know what happened, right? Maybe it went to spam. Maybe if you're like me, I sometimes go through emails real quick. I forget to star it, and I just forgot all about it. But just say, I am puzzled that I never heard from you. Great word. Versus making a quick judgment. I walk in, my daughter Eva, who's now home with us for this month, and I walk in and the kitchen is a mess. And the dishes are stacked up. And I walk in and I can say, Eva, what are you doing? It's a mess in here. I could say that. Or I could say, Eva, I'm puzzled. I'm puzzled. The dishes. Like, what happened? 'Cause again, I don't know, right? I don't know what happened. Could have been a crisis. Who knows? Maybe she was about to get up. Or I call someone, they don't return the phone call. Days pass. You should have called me. Or I could say, hey, Rich, I'm puzzled. I left a message, never heard from you. Like, what's up? Because I don't know. And it may just be, it could be 1,000 things of why. But I'm just puzzled because I really don't know. That word puzzle, I'm telling you, we should buy a t-shirt. It could change the whole church. All right, so hold on to puzzle. My wife said to me, she says, Pete, I'm really puzzled. You fill up the dishwasher all the time, but you never turn it on. She said to me just the other day, she goes, I'm so puzzled, Pete. You sit in your office, and you're freezing with a jacket on. And I'm puzzled why you just don't bring a heater up there and turn it on. And I want to say to her, because I'm cheap. But I'm puzzled. It's okay. The second is complaints and recommendations. In the new family of Jesus, we teach people how to make a complaint. Now, how did your family do complaining? That would be a fun study to do, wouldn't it? But we're not going to do your family. We're going to do, how do we complain in the new family of Jesus? So we're going to put a little structure on it today. And so we have a little formula, and you'll notice it there in your notes. I notice and I prefer. So again, I don't know how your family did it. And some families, you don't make complaints. You just shut up and you bury it. And if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. And or many people are very good at complaining, but they're not good at taking responsibility. They notice things are wrong. I know that pastor preached so long today, and the worship was too loud today, but they don't make any recommendation. They just got things to say. And so we teach people very simply, I notice and I prefer. So I notice it's cold in here, for example, in the room, and I prefer if someone would raise the heat. I notice that there's lunch often left at the office over the weekend in the refrigerator, and I prefer if people would just own their stuff on Fridays and take it home. Or I notice that people just sit at my desk and it becomes a mess, and I would prefer if whoever sits at my desk and uses it at work would just, clean it up before they left. But it's just, I notice and I prefer. Believe me, children love it. They love the complaints. But the key thing is complaints and recommendation. Very simple, but it's hard to do if you spent your whole life. If you spent your whole life complaining, we call it dirty fighting. We teach clean fighting it in EHS. It's hard to do. Fourth thing is new information. Just new information. What's going on in your life? I got a 97 on my test, or I'm buying a new car next week, or you know what, we're moving next weekend, or my son's going off to college. It's just new information because it keeps our relationship current. And then lastly is hopes and wishes. When you hear what's going on in a person's heart about their hopes and wishes, you get a window into their soul. So again, it can be a hope and a wish of something immediate. It can be something long-term, like, hey, I really hope we can go to the movie this weekend. I hope I can go see Lone Survivor, or I hope I get that new job when our office expands into this whole new arena. Or I hope my son John makes the soccer team, in the spring. Again, it could be anything. I hope someday to go to grad school and get my MBA. It could be anything large or small, but I get a window into people's souls. So here's what we're going to do. James, we're going to get in the middle here, and we will model it, and then you're going to do it. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to go, let's get a chair in the middle here. You got to get a chair. So, okay, so you need your thing here. So just do you have a here, take this. Let me see if I got this. There you go. Okay, so now you got to look at me. So forget them. Who? Them. This is me and you. So I'll say, hey, James, can we do a community temperature reading together?
Let's do that.
Let's do that. Good. All right. So again, appreciations or excitements. I really appreciate the warmth of your wife, dinner, everybody walking in the building, your staff. It has just been. I feel, even though I'm a Yankee.
Really?
I feel very welcome. I feel very comfortable. And thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
And I have to make up something. I'm kidding.
Make up something.
Yes.
It doesn't have to be about me. It can be about anything you like.
I appreciate all these guys who worked to make this event happen, but in addition to being appreciative of you being willing to come here, to me, a total stranger at the time, I am just really grateful for this daily office book that you wrote. For an 8-week period, I did that every morning and every night. I did it alone in the bathroom, so you were in there with me. And I never reread anything, but when I finished the 8 weeks, I started again. It really meant a lot to me.
That's great. Thank you.
So thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. All right. I have a puzzle. I'm going up now. Here, okay, we're on puzzles now. James, I'm puzzled that I came to your house for dinner tonight, and we had Italian food. And I'm puzzled that you weren't afraid of cooking Italian food for me.
And when I get home, I will say to Lisa, honey, I am puzzled.
That's great.
So I am puzzled that you've got this this Yankee accent,
Yeah.
and you talk even faster than I do. And I understood every word. Like, how'd you do that?
I don't know.
I don't know.
Thank you.
Okay.
That's great. All right. I have a complaint. I've only known you 4 hours.
It doesn't take long. Think about the people who've known me a long time. Yeah.
I noticed that when you called me to invite me to come, you dropped the name of Leighton Ford, because you know I was his friend and he's been mentoring you for many years. And I noticed that you dropped his name like I thought that he told you to invite me to come. But he didn't. And I prefer, just ask me direct. No, that's really a half joke, actually. I noticed that this is a beautiful building, and you know the Gothic, and it really is quite gorgeous. And we're at pews, and so what we're about to do, I prefer if we were at chairs that these folks could move the chairs around for the exercise we're about to do.
There you go. It's a beautiful room.
It is.
Has a little built-in stiffness to it, but yeah, you're right. So I have a complaint. I noticed that we like to be prepared for guest speakers who come, and as best I can tell, you and I conferred over what we were going to do. That was in the car coming over here after dinner.
Yes.
I noticed that. I prefer to prepare in advance.
Thank you.
He gave me a different example to use, but... Yeah.
Thank you. Well done. My new information is I have a daughter who just graduated high school who's doing a gap year, and she's about to take off for Asia. Right now was in India, now she's going to Asia. And then I have another daughter just graduated college. She's doing a gap year, and she is in Thailand. So my new information is that my kids are flying all over the place.
And my new information, I can't think. We had a movie frenzy the last few weeks. I've seen many movies, and I'd recommend a bunch of them, but the one I loved the most, and it may be an index of the fact that I fell in love with Julie Andrews in Mary Poppins in 1963, but the movie Saving Mr. Banks, it was so wonderful, at least I can tell you, at the end, I cried for like 5 minutes while the credits were rolling.
Wow.
I don't even know what that's about. There were happy tears. It was a wonderful thing.
I hope we can talk about that later.
Yes.
That's great. Thank you. Awesome.
It's the iceberg.
Well done. Hopes and wishes, top. I hope that someday, now that I'm on your turf here in Charlotte, that you can come visit me in Queens. Secondly, I hope that we do have an opportunity to follow through and work together a bit more. This has been a pleasure, all the prep with you and your staff and being here as well.
The one I thought of when you asked me this is Lisa and I are at long last empty nesters and trying to figure that out. I hope that my children will have, no, I was about to say I hope my children will have children. I hope they will get married and then have children. And I can try the grandparent thing.
Good. Awesome. Great. Thank you. All right. Appreciate it. Well done. All right. Give him a hand. Thank you very much. All right. Now, there's a lot of us in the room here, so just a couple of you. What did you observe? Raise your hand. Probably people up here in front, unless you could really yell out. What did you observe? Yes. It was conversation, but it was a structured conversation. Okay, what else?
You were trying to meet at a common place.
Yeah. Yeah, we call this confiding light. We're trying to meet in a common place. This actually, we have 8 core skills. This is the lightest first one. And it's called confiding light. So you don't bring up like an intense issue of like complaints. This is like complaint lights. If you're with your spouse, you don't bring up like in-laws or sex, or not the time to bring that up, all right? What else did you notice? There were some awkward moments. Absolutely, where's the southern stiffness? He just went after me, didn't he? I mean, he just lunged in. But yeah, it was, it was a little bit, but it was all fine because there was a structure to it. Yes. But it was civil. It was civil, absolutely. Yes. What's that? Moments of anticipation, yeah. And it was good. And you'll notice we were eye to eye. Did you notice that? Many of us, we don't even look at people when we talk to them eye to eye. We were actually, we were actually facing each other. There are some of us that we don't even know how to have a conversation eye to eye. We've had couples, I've had pastors and spouses at a pastor's conference we do once a year, and we have to have a coach. They can be married 20 years to keep them eye to eye. And they're married 20 years, 30 years, because the habits are so deep. Because you understand, we're breaking up ground in some cases that goes back generations. If you've been dirty complaining your whole life, your parents did dirty complaining, your grandparents did dirty complaining, you better believe it. Jesus may be in your heart, but grandpa's in your bones. Do you understand? And so for you to say, I noticed, and you're going to be like, this is stupid, this is ridiculous, this is childish. And we say, yes. We're putting you on basically training wheels. We're putting you in a structure on purpose. Do you understand? To have an experience. Appreciation, for example, is actually very close to giving thanks and praise in Scripture. I could give you a deep biblical thesis or argument for all this, on why it's important for healthy bonding, healthy connection. But we are supposed to be the best lovers on the face of the earth. People are supposed to know us by the way we love. Okay, so this is basically a very simple first step to help people begin to connect. So the only way you're going to get this is I need you to do it. So here's what I want you to do. Now, you may be with somebody you know. If so, that's great. You may not be with anybody you know. You may be sitting as a stranger, so introduce yourself. We do this in singles groups, teens, all ages, families, couples, all mixes. And so whoever you're with. Now, the problem is it's a crowded room here. So feel free. There's some seats up here. You want to spread out a bit, but it's going to be a little bit tough. It's really crowded in here. But I need you to, go, as best you can, face eye to eye. Now, you've got this chart in front of you, and you're going to go up. Now, again, if you're with someone you don't know, you can make an appreciation about, it doesn't have to be about them. It's just, I really appreciate that the weather's warm. I really appreciate that, it could be anything. I really appreciate that my mom showed up today and helped me with the kids. Fantastic, And same thing with, if you have, for example, a puzzle, and your puzzle's not about that person, you say to them, I need you to stand in for my boss. I'm really puzzled. You gave everybody a raise, but not me. I'm just puzzled, you know. Anyway. But tell them who they're standing in for. A parent, a child, a friend. Same thing with complaints and possible solutions. It doesn't have to be about that person. We did that on purpose here because we wanted to model it. But it can be a complaint about anybody. Just say, you're standing in for my son. And then you say, I notice and I prefer. I'm going to ask you to practice it. All right? And go up and try to do all 5 going up. And it's going to take you probably just 7 minutes or 8 minutes. And you'll notice we went back and forth. I went, he went. I went, he went. And you just kind of go up the temperature reading. Okay? We all good? All right, so I need you to break up as best you can. Introduce yourself to somebody in groups of 2, 3 if you have to. How'd we do? Take a couple of moments here, and what was that experience like for you? And just a few of you can answer. Obviously, there's 700 of us in this room, and James has a microphone, so just raise your hands and we'll get you a microphone. You can, but you got to be tight. How was that experience for you? Yes, right here. What's that?
Insightful.
Insightful. Okay, great. Let's not ask what that means. We hope that's a good word. Yes? It was honest and truthful. We had a very discussion here with Jack about honest and truthful. He was boasting how he's very direct. But his directness tended to be a bit strong. So it is direct. It's true. But there's a direct and there's direct. Some of us we're very proud that we're so honest, but we're not respectful necessarily. And there's a way to be honest without hurting people. Because if I can use your example, I noticed that the Sunday school class ends late, and I prefer if it ends on time. Versus it never ends on time, and it should. Well, you're direct. It's true, you're being honest, but you're being nasty. And so we're supposed to be loving people. That's the call, is to love well. The person doesn't feel love from you, it's not helpful. Now again, every culture, and this has been worked out in a very international, multicultural, multiracial environment, every culture lies in its own way. Now, do you have Southern nice? Everybody's nice. So I say, how are you? Everything's great, but you never really know what's going on. And so people lie a lot. There's a lot of lying that goes on in churches. And how do you build healthy community if everybody's lying, being nice? You can't. You cannot build the kingdom of God on lies. I don't care what culture you want to call it. You can call it, Indonesian culture, Chinese culture, we can, American Midwest culture, Midwest nice. You can put all you want on it. But a lie is a lie is a lie. And you cannot build a countercultural, healthy community with lies. So therefore, if that's your culture, I've got to learn, how do I speak clearly? How do I speak honestly? How do I speak respectfully? How do I speak in a timely manner? That is a skill to learn. So actually part of EHS, you're going to be doing a course afterwards, is learning skills. And the skills are to actually put into practice the theology that we all believe in our heads. What good is if we believe in loving well if we don't know how to do it? We're just repeating the same patterns of our family of origin, generation after generation. And my wife likes to say that her family were blamers, and she's now birthed 4 blamerlings. We just pass it on. Okay, other observations. Yes? What's that? I couldn't hear it.
There's a southern locution, which is, oh, bless her heart.
Bless her heart.
And There's not much blessing in it. It's kind of crass pity, right? Yeah.
Thank you. Yes. It was authentic. What was authentic about? What does that mean for you when you say that?
Honest and comfortable.
Honest and comfortable. Good. Great. Yes.
I noticed that it was actually anxiety producing rather than comforting.
Yes. I noticed it was anxiety producing rather than comforting. And I'd say, that's great. You're growing. In other words, that's not so bad that people are anxious. Of course, it feels very uncomfortable. In fact, some of you, I may have hated parts of it. And I would say to you, that's good. I mean, that's healthy because you're breaking some patterns that aren't helpful. Do you understand? It's not helpful if you don't know how to make a healthy complaint with a recommendation. It's just not healthy because think of all of life, things we don't like. I mean, things that are different. So you're married for 30 years and you don't know how to make a complaint with your spouse? I mean, that's not very helpful to build a great marriage. I'll tell you one thing, it's not good for a church because everyone's mind reading, everyone's making we have a skill called stop mind reading. I think that you think. Jerry said, how did it go in North Carolina? I say, they hated me. How do you know that? I walked out the door and I was leaving, one person said to me, man, that was boring. And based on that, I made an interpretation of the whole group. Judge North Carolina, I was mind reading 700 people. It's done all the time, isn't it? So we say in the body of Christ, we don't do mind reading. We don't make assumptions. So I check it out. Lynn, I said, Lynn and Jack, I stopped in. When we do this at a conference, everybody gets a coach to make sure that you actually do it. Like, in other words, so you didn't say it with a zing. I notice, because every tool can be a hammer. I notice, and I prefer, it's like, wait a second, that's not what this is about. And you've got to help people and coach them. And so, maybe they're offended by the fact that I coach them. But to be able to say, Pete, I prefer if you just let us do this by ourselves first. Fine. Would you do that? You would do it, Jack. Lynn would not do it. I don't think so. Very hard for her. Okay, others. Yes.
There's no agenda. I find it's not conversational. It's not dependent on the response. It's
Yep.
initial, and it's free in that sense, but at the same time, there's no alpha and omega to it.
Yeah. Yes. Part of the purpose, and just this is you don't do this all the time, right? But it's a structure with parameters and boundaries. Because what you're doing is you're equalizing power in a relationship. In most relationships, especially families, even marriages and friendships, one person tends to take up more space than the other. And so it's wonderful for introverts, actually, to get some room to breathe. And of course, this can be used in so many different ways, but it's very intentionally structured. But the goal is actually not so much the tool. Like at our church, the word puzzle is part of the culture. And someone makes a complaint just makes a complaint but doesn't, make a recommendation, you can be sure someone's going to say, at New Life Fellowship Church, we don't do that. If you don't like that, what's your recommendation? And so there's a real awareness of we have certain skills that we operate with in the new family of Jesus. And as a leadership, we're creating a new culture that's radically different than the culture out there. And so just, this tool is used in marriages. It's used among friends. It's used in families. We used to do it as a family when our kids were small. And we do it at the table. And we just, 6 of us, and we say, let's do appreciations and excitement, And not everyone has to share, and then we go on, And of course, the kids had tons of complaints. They loved that, But we teach them how to do it right. And what's really interesting is our kids grew up. And again, there's 8 skills. This is one of them. They just naturally became part of their DNA. They would bring it to the school. They would. At one point, in 5th grade, one of my daughters got in trouble with her teacher because she corrected her teacher. It was not appropriate. That was a dirty fighting you did. And I said, that is not what you're 12. You're 10 years old. He's in his 30s. But so it's a wonderful tool. And it's a very elastic tool. Like, in other words, at our staff meetings at our church, we have about 20, 25 of us around a room. And we start every staff meeting with appreciations. Because, again, appreciations is very close to praise. And that's all we do at the staff meeting, appreciations. I really appreciate, the sound. I really appreciate the way you served me, coming up here and helping me with the computer and sound. I really appreciate, it's tremendous to create culture. We've had folks come out of the corporate world, do internship with us and tell us, I say, what was the highlight of your year in Life Fellowship? They said, the staff meetings. I've never been a part of a healthy staff. And just the appreciations created such a culture week after week after week. And we just do it for 10 minutes. We don't beat it like a dead horse. But do you understand? My wife and I, we were married 8 years. We didn't know how to have because we never saw it modeled. So do you understand? This is very simple, but it's quite difficult to actually practice over time. And the nice thing about this, it can be done. You can do it very quickly. My wife and I, if I get home and we're going for a walk together, I might just say, let's do a community temperature reading, and we're walking. We call it a CTR for short. Let's do a CTR. And we're walking. We're not even looking at each other. So I really, what do you appreciate? I really appreciate. I had a great time out there, and in Charlotte, and she'll say, I really, we just go walking. And I say, I don't have any complaints, and we just skip the complaints or skip the puzzles. You can skip one and you just move on. I know teachers that use it in classrooms with students. They put it up on the board. And again, depending on how much time you have, it's a very elastic tool. In other words, say you've only got 3 minutes or 4 minutes. You can say, let's just do appreciations and let's just do hopes, wishes, and dreams. That's it. For example, if you know there's tension in your workplace, skip complaints. Okay, as a group, just skip it. Skip it. It's not good. And so you can use it as you see fit. Lots of folks have taken these skills into the workplace. We haven't formed a curriculum for the workplace because our goal is primarily churches, but many hedge funds, dental offices, they'll do with their staff just to create. It gives them a tool. So again, there's 8 skills. This is your first one. So I want to encourage you as you leave it, try it out this week. You got that sheet of paper, and just try doing it with some people. Say, would you mind? I want to teach you this skill I learned at church, and try it out, and begin to create a healthy culture as a church. All right? Okay. So I leave that with you. There's actually if you go, I think there's a curriculum that goes with it. I think it's on our website, but you can, if you have an iPhone, you can actually get an app. You can watch us explain it, and you get the visual with it. So it's called Emotionally Healthy Spirituality, I think, app. So you can check that out. Okay, so let's do this. You're launching February 3rd here at this church, the EHS course you're calling it, or what are you calling it? Small group curriculum, whatever. Emotionally Healthy Spirituality, something. And so there's going to be 8 weeks. Is it 8 weeks in a row? And there's 8 topics. Now let me explain. This is meant to be an introduction to emotionally healthy spirituality. It's not meant to be exhaustive. It's meant to introduce you to a paradigm, a way of looking at spirituality in life that is basically meant to take you into your iceberg, kind of open you up to a much larger long-term journey. And actually skills, like we did here, actually follows it. So, for example, the first study is called The Problem of Emotionally Unhealthy Spirituality. So you'll look at, the study is, if you remember Saul in the Old Testament, Saul is a great example of someone who is emotionally very unaware of what's going on inside of him. He's jealous, he's angry, he's stubborn, but he's unaware of it. He's emotionally unhealthy, and he does not have a deep walk with God. In fact, he's a great leader, anointed and gifted, but you never see him writing psalms like David. You never see him praying and hungering and thirsting for God like David. David, on the other hand, is a great example for us. David writes these psalms. He's suicidal. He wants to kill people. He's depressed. He wants to kill himself. I mean, he's all over the map emotionally, but he pours himself out before God. He's not hiding anything. He's just, here he is, raw. And yet he's got a passion for God. He's got a contemplative life. And we say David's a great model for us of being men and women after God's own heart. So the first looks at we have a problem. The second is know yourself that you may know God. And basically that we've got to learn to know who we are. And that we are authentically ourselves, not trying to put on somebody else's face, not trying to be somebody we're not. And you'll look at David going up against Goliath. He takes off Saul's armor. He's just himself. He's a shepherd. He charges Goliath. But he's himself. He knows God. He knows who he is. And he's very free. And part of the Christian life is to get you free. And again, culture, families of origin, put stuff on us of what we're supposed to be like. Jesus has come to set you free to be who you really are. That's your gift to the world. And so the second study looks at that. The third is go back to go forward. And you go back and how your family of origin has impacted who you are today. Now, it's just a study in your group that you'll do. And you'll look at Joseph in Genesis 50. Now, it's not a full genogram, but it will begin to look at what are some earthquake events and messages maybe you got from your family growing up that are impacting who you are today in a way that they're holding you back. See, we only go back when it impedes our going forward, if that makes sense. And that's a biblical principle there. And Joseph's a great example of that. Journey through the wall, it looks at that circle, that wall I put up before. We all hit walls: cancers, divorces, affairs, unemployment, bankruptcy, all dark nights of the soul. Everybody hits walls, multiple walls in our lives. And what does it mean to journey through that wall and not be stuck? And it looks at that, looks at the life of Abraham. At 120, the guy hit a wall, okay, having to sacrifice his son Isaac. And then we talk about grief and loss. I don't know if you're aware, but 2/3 of the Psalms are griefs and laments. I didn't have any theology for laments. I mean, Jesus was called man of sorrows. Most of the book of Job is him lamenting, grieving. Jeremiah, the guy's suicidal, manic depressive. I mean, he is, but this issue of grief and loss is a big biblical theme. Our culture doesn't do grief and loss. We medicate with drugs, we medicate with activity, we medicate with addictions, something to take away the pain. Scripture calls us to embrace reality and go through it. And God meets us in reality, not illusion. And that begins to look at what does it look like to actually grieve my losses so that God can birth something new out of it. But you have to be willing to go into it. And so it begins to introduce that whole theme. It's a big theme in the Bible. I was shocked. I never looked at it until my pain was so great. I finally began to look at, in seriously, the Psalms and other places. And then it looks at discover the rhythms of the daily office and Sabbath. And so you'll be doing these daily offices. You can actually download off Amazon an ebook of it too, the daily office. So if you're an ebook, all the books and stuff's on ebook. But you'll talk about how do I slow down and get a rhythm in my life where I'm not just running 24/7. And Sabbath keeping and offices will introduce that to you. But they're obviously very big themes. Grow into an emotionally mature adult. And we just did a skill, and we call this growing into an emotionally healthy adult. Some of us, we may be, adults physically, but actually emotionally, we're still living in our family of origin like we're 12. And it's not our fault, that's all we know. And the church is the place we actually learn something different. And so that's part of our discipleship. And then finally, you go the next step to develop a rule of life. How do I restructure my life so that I'm anchored in the love of God and living differently? And so, again, I want to invite you to, with James here and the staff, to sign up for a group. Maybe you've never been in a small group. It won't hurt. I can just promise you this. You'll be stimulated. And, I always say this. You do the group for 8 weeks. If the goal of the 8 weeks is that you make one small change in your life, that's it. If you can say at the end of that 8 weeks, I realized one thing and I'm going to make one change in my life, you've had a great, great group. It's been a great success for you. Don't try to do 90 things. Just do one. And see, the goal of this is to introduce it to your church and to yourself. And then, the staff and the leadership will take you for next steps for years to come. But it really is opening a door. This is like a doorway. Once you go through it, you can never go back. Because you know what? It's so real. It's so broken. It's so authentic. We're all on the same level playing ground. It doesn't matter if you're rich, poor, educated, uneducated. We're all broken, everybody. All of us. And that's what makes our church. It doesn't matter we're from 73 nations, because we're all human and we're all broken. We all need God. We all have losses. We all hit walls. It's a wonderful way to build a community, but it's not pretending. It's not showing. It's not Midwest nice. It's done. It's a new culture here, and really it's culture, I would say, of Paul, of David. Imagine David. He commits murder. He commits adultery. And it's a tremendous failure. He writes a song about it, Psalm 51, and he puts it in the hymn book to be sung at church. I mean, how many of you would do such a thing? Your greatest failure, put it into a song, could be sung in the whole church. And make sure it's in the history books for everybody to read for all of history. If I was the king, I would have taken those chapters out. Now, how different is that than American Christianity? Right? If I do something like that, I got to hide it because you'll kick me out of the church. What a different model. So With that, I leave you, James. I hand it back to you. And thank you very much. It's been a great pleasure.
I said Sunday before last that part of what I loved about Pete, and I didn't have met him yet, is that when I invited him to speak, he said, you got to do some work before I come, and you got to do some work after I come. The goal was not to come and say, dang, that guy was a good speaker. Now, you're probably thinking he was a good speaker, but if that's all you got out of this, how sad, right? So we've got a great, bright future before us in the weeks to come. I hope that you'll participate as fully as possible. Let's continue to share with each other and be part of this great adventure. I think this is very exciting. Pete, thank you so very much for being with us.